Hey guys, GP Jesus here,
Wow, GPA Jesus uploaded more than once a week.
and in this video we're going to practice using the Phillips curve in an FRQ question. This is question 2 from set 1 of the 2019 AP Macroeconomics free response questions, and the link to these questions along with the answer key are going to be linked below in the description. So, for the upcoming 2020 exam, there will only be FRQs. You won't see any MCs, just FRQ questions. And so doing tons of past FRQs as practice is the best way to prepare, as FRQs always have similar structures and similar patterns. So before we walk through this problem, try it out yourself first. Keep in mind that you should finish this question in around 10 to 15 minutes. Watching videos on FRQs isn't nearly as helpful as actually doing them, and concepts like the Phillips curve especially are best learned by actually graphing them. So let's go through the question. Assume the expected inflationary rate of the country is 3% and the current unemployment rate is 6%, while the NRU is 4%. So in part A, we need to draw a perfectly labeled graph of the Phillips curve, showing the short run and long run Phillips curves, along with the short run equilibrium, label it as X, and to also plot the numerical values. So first off, this is a Phillips curve, and we know that the short run Phillips curve shows the inverse relationship between unemployment and inflation. So it would be a downward sloping curve like this. Whether it's a straight line or curve doesn't really matter, you just need to make sure it's downward sloping as it's an inverse relationship. Now we also have to draw in LRPC, which we know is just a vertical line, and most things in macroeconomics with the word long run are quite vertical, with its bottom being NRU. And it's better to keep LRPC around the middle of the graph so that you have enough space to either draw a short run equilibrium here or here, depending on how the question asks. Just leave enough space on both sides to make it clear for the reader to see. Let's then write out where the short run equilibrium is. And if you recall in the last video, I said that either knowing the actual inflation rate or unemployment rate will show where the short run equilibrium is. And it says that the current or actual unemployment rate is 6%. We already know for NRU, it can replace this numerical value with 4%. We know that the current unemployment rate is 6%. Since it's a larger value, it will be to the right of the long run equilibrium. Let's just put it around the middle to make it clear. So we're going to label this 6%. We go from this 6% to the SRPC to find the short run equilibrium, which we have to label as X. And finally, let's find the expected inflation rate, which is a little bit trickier, as is it asking for the short run inflation, which would be right here. Let's just write it IRA for an actual, or would it be around here, which is the long run inflation rate? Now the hint to this is in the word expected. You see, the word actual, which if you look at part B, is typically used to refer to the short run equilibrium, along with the short run inflation or employment right now. It's the real thing currently, so it's called the actual. And so expected is not the current one, which is for the long run equilibrium. And we know the expected inflation rate is 3%, so let's just write that there. And one thing to point out, as I mentioned in the previous video, if you blank out at this point and just can't remember how the Phillips curve looks, as sometimes it can be quite confusing, really just think of the money market graph. I mean, you have the downward sloping money demand and vertical money supply, and you just replace these labels with LRPC and SRPC and you pretty much have the same graph. And so this is essentially all we need to get full points for a correctly labeled graph. If we look at the answer key, we get 1 point for correctly drawing the SRPC curve, which is downward sloping, so that's +1. We also get 1 point for drawing the LRPC curve, which also shows the short run equilibrium labeled as X, which we've already done, which is on the right of the LRPC, and our numbers are correct with 4%, 6%, and 3%. So that's another point, and in total, part A, we just got +2 points. So part A is now done. Part B asks if actual inflation is greater than, less than, or equal to the expected inflation of 3%. Well, we don't even really need numbers for this part, we just need to look at the graph. This is the actual inflation rate, this is expected, and well, clearly we can see that actual inflation rate is lower than the expected inflation rate, so it's just less than. And since it is lower than the expected inflation rate, we would call this unanticipated disinflation. So part C asks if lenders will be better off once they realize the lower inflation rate, and if they'll be better off or worse off. There are two ways to solve this. So one is using my acronym that I developed specifically for this, LLL. This means lenders like lower. Using this logic, if lenders like lower, then buyers will like higher. And so that just basically gives you the general answer, but let's understand why. And we can prove this using the Fisher's equation, which is nominal interest rate is equal to real plus expected inflation. And just like really easy algebra, you can rearrange this to real is equal to nominal minus expected inflation. If expected inflation is larger, then the real value will decrease. While if this is smaller, then you're subtracting a smaller number, so your real interest rates will be larger. So if expected inflation is larger, then the lender will receive less real. But if it is smaller, then they'll receive more. And in general, there's a great Khan Academy article on this that I'll link below in the description that explains it a lot better. And if you're cramming, just remember LLL. So finally we go to part D. Based on the relationship between actual and expected inflation rates identified in part A, what will happen to the natural unemployment rate in the long run? Well, nothing. Remember, LRPC is found from NRU. And, well, LRPC is based on the long run. This relationship between actual and expected inflation rate is really just about the short run equilibrium. But in the long run, natural rate of unemployment will just stay the same. And remember, it'll only change if structural or frictional unemployment have some large change to them. And the question doesn't really mention anything on industries becoming outdated or any of that. You will just write no change. So that's the Phillips curve 2019 FRQ walkthrough. Again, you can find this question linked down below in the description. And practice as many FRQs as possible, as the entire exam will be a FRQ due to the coronavirus. And GPA Jesus out, I died for your grades.